So next up we have Dr. Scott Carter is a tenured professor of economics and policy at the University of Tulsa. He earned his doctorate in economics from the New School for Social Research in New York City and is the founder of Working People Lead Tulsa, a local organization that promotes working class consciousness. Dr. Scott Carter, welcome to At Home 5.
Oh, great. Thank you. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Can.
Yeah, okay, great. I want to thank you very much, everybody, Mika, Erica, Jessica, Philip, thank you very much. To be here. I go to the conference a lot. We've been doing a lot of scholarly conferences online now, in the same format we have here. I got to admit that these conferences that I have with people like ourselves here are much more rewarding. I find that academia is great, and I think it's really important to elevate one's mind, but I get really tired of a lot of the arrogance and a lot of the ego that's associated with being in the academy. And what I want to convey to people, especially in this forum, is that there is such a thing as the organic intellectual, as I see as the working class intellectual. And what does that mean? That means that as working class people, or as just la gente, the people, we have the capacity to understand the conditions of our own existence. We do not need someone else to tell us how we're supposed to be. We don't need someone necessarily. Now, we need to listen. We can't be arrogant ourselves. I think humility and being humble is really important. And that's something that I see from my own working class background. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own issues, dealing with the fact that I'm a son of the South. I'm the descendant of Confederate veterans. I had all that baggage associated with me, even as I was a Marxist trained economist in New York City. Somehow I'm really trying to, get that class experience in there. And I have been completely humbled, and I have been completely understanding. I'm not woke, I'm waking. Okay, I don't see that as a past tense. I see it as a process going forward. I certainly have learned a lot in the last few years and in the last few weeks and the last few months and even the last few minutes. And I think that it's important that we celebrate that. And again, our experiences as people, as working class people, and again, that's not the only way in which we can understand these matters, but it's the way in which I think is an important way to understand these matters. And is a great conjunction. Is that you could do this and that, not this or that. And I think, especially when we're coming in the United States, and as I see the mosaic of what working class experience is in the United States is absolutely essential. In New York City, guy working at the most expensive graduate school in New York, and I was also organizing. I don't like to say activist, I like to say organizer. Activists are people that are kind of on tour. They're like tourists, and I grew up in Florida, so I know all about tourists coming down. And so the idea of the activists, they come in and they do their thing, and then they leave and they go. Whereas if you're organizing, you're part of it. So what we would say is that we're not organizing working people, we are working people organizing. You change that around. And one of the things that I had the wonderful opportunity to do, and this speaks to what Jessica was saying, especially with respect to the undocumented, it says my internet connection is unstable. So if I come off, can you text me, Erica, for some reason if I fall off and I'm just babbling? One of the things that I learned working class consciousness in the streets of Chinatown. For years, I organized with Chinese Staff and Workers Association in Chinatown. That was a working class organization that organized with documented and undocumented workers in Chinatown. And it was there that I began to learn that the struggle is my struggle too. I'm not Chinese. Okay, but I am a worker. And so what we would do is that I would learn those kind of things. And that's always informed how I understand matters. Economics. Let me just say about economics, okay? Economics is a broad discipline. It ain't only just demand and supply. It's not all about the stock market. It is a broad discipline. It's not all suit and tie. It's also about healthcare. It's also about labor. It's also about exploitation. And so when people ask me, say, Carter, how does a Marxist economist go to Tulsa, Oklahoma? I say, I don't know, ask them. They hired me. And so for my and so I kind of, what that does is that shows how important the old timers in 2006, when I was hired at the University of Tulsa, how they understood the breadth and the depth of what economic inquiry really is. And it's not just about making money, it's about value and distribution. It's about wealth and distribution. And you're going to see emphasis, or at least when I speak, emphasis on the question of distribution. It's not who necessarily makes the wealth or makes the income, it's who gets the income and who gets the wealth. And so that's why when people ask me, what makes you a Marxist? I don't have horns on my head. I'm not green. I'm not out there, all this. What I mean by that is simply that the incredible amount of income and wealth that's generated every year in society is done from working people. We are the ones who create the wealth. We are the ones who make the wealth, but we ain't the ones who get the wealth. And that becomes a question of property relation. That becomes a question of legal relations. And what we need to do is we need to understand that economic laws, the laws of demand and supply, are not like the law of gravity. Okay, they're socially constructed. The laws of distribution are not like the law of gravity. Just because Bill Gates got a the property such that those billions of dollars go into his bank account every day. He just sits there and it accrues to him by virtue of the property relation. And this is what I want to talk a little bit about today. This of the American context doesn't only mean liberty of people. Indeed, it means liberty of property. And I think that's an important element that we have to understand when we're looking at the history of our country. Boom, okay, capital, all right? One of the things I want to talk about is capital. We hear there's all this thing about capital. Capital, what is capital? Capital is a social relation. Capital is not a thing. Capital is an ability to get more from a particular endeavor or more from a particular property. It's going to be able to accrue you some revenue. Where does the revenue come from? Where does it come from? It comes from the fact that working people create newly created income, newly created wealth, and the capital allows for that extraction to your own bank account if you happen to be fortunate enough to own that particular property, or as we see with respect to the undocumented and documented status, if you can have the legal status to do so. It has nothing to do with how productive you are. That's when people say, oh, the undocumented, they take it. They don't take. They give a hell of a lot more than they ever take. You look at the essential workers now, we see who doesn't really matter. It's the people that are out there having to put in the blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that the income and wealth are going to be created so that people now in my position where I am privileged, and I understand that, which is why we have to speak out. We have to use these platforms of privilege to say no more. It allows that to happen, and that's what we need to talk about here. Now, on that, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about what I call Americans Racist History 101. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can everybody, this one here, can everybody see that? Are you seeing that? You have that here, sharing? Okay, let me put this one here. Slideshow from the beginning, from the start. Do people see that paper? I can't even see anybody now. Yes, I don't even see anybody. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. America's Racist History 101. Okay. Now this comes from a paper that I'm working on. Okay. I grew up in the South. I was born in Alabama in 1965. It was George was the governor there. Madison County, Alabama, and Huntsville, Alabama. My parents came from Georgia. I have family that fought in the Confederacy. I got the so-called Confederate veterans. And my whole life, I was told that there's something special about that, about being a Confederate veteran, etc. And I tried to hold on to that as much as I could, know that it was racist, but there's something else to that. There's something that we can have a class associated with that. That was all burst asunder in 2015 when the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina happened. I won't even mention that person's name, that bloodthirsty killer who came into that church and murdered those 9 innocents. The name I will mention, however, is Breeze Newsom, the woman who climbed up that flagpole on top into South Carolina state grounds and ripped that flag down and said, I know I'm going to get arrested, but that's coming down now. And when I saw that, I was troubled. It was years going on. My family, my kids went to Robert E. Lee Elementary School right across the street, literally from where I live. And I'm seeing all this Confederate stuff, and I'm starting to really, wait a minute, this isn't working. And when I saw Breeze Newsom take that flag off, I said, that's it, no more. It was my awakening. It was when I understood, not only do I have to know that this is I'm one of the good guys, and I'm still holding on to this baggage. I'm still have this idea that there's something there. There's got to be something there. And the only thing that's there are lies. The only thing that's there is gaslighting. The only thing that is there is a complete whitewashing of the historical account. And so in that capacity that I began to then look and say, you know what, let me look into the history of this stuff. And then I started to do a deep dive into the history of the what I call the cult of the Confederacy. And that took me into a whole range of issues. One of the things I realized is that this issue of the Confederacy, that's not just a Southern problem, that's an American problem. Okay, it's not just something that I have from the South. It's something that white people all over this country accepted, and we're seeing that now. When I left Florida in 1991, never went north of Tennessee at that time, going to New York City to study for my PhD. I'm driving through New Jersey. I'll never forget it. And I see this guy with a rebel flag on his car. I'm thinking that doesn't make any sense, because for me it was certainly a Southern thing for me. But then I begin to realize that it's not. And so then you begin to look and you see the history of that. And so I call this founding hypocrisy. Okay, this country is founded on hypocrisy. This particular image is an image, and I pulled all of these off of the internet. I was doing this morning, so it's just a hodgepodge of a PowerPoint, so excuse that. I don't give the proper citations of it. If any particular images are not appropriate, I think there are some people that excuse that here. And I said, what's the history of the country about? So people need to be much more aware of the history of racism and enslavement in this country. Enslavement of Black people and the genocide of the Indians and the founding of the Native Americans and the founding of the United States of America. We can no longer be content with fairy tales, lies, and hypocrisy that replaces the actual historical record. The myth of America as a bastion of freedom and liberty, you note I put the quotation of liberty there. When they say liberty, liberty for who? Liberty for what? It's always liberty for property. It's liberty for privilege. They don't care about the liberty of the people who are dying, who are starving, who are working, who are being exploited, where we have this system of integrated and intersectional exploitations, where you have the super exploitation of Jessica and her family having to sweat just walking outside. And how does that affect all working people and all people in our society? What does that do? Bring total society down. To be content with those fairy tales, lies, and hypocrisy, and we need to bust the myth of liberty. So the hypocrisy. In fact, in America, the American story is one of conquest, colonialism, and enslavement. Now, this is now. Are being aware of this, and that's what we've been seeing with the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters movement, and et cetera, that's been coming out. More Americans becoming aware of the fact that what we are told at the mainstream historical account is patently untrue. Since 1619, there has been presence of African American or people from African descent onto the shores of what we now know as America. The enslavement of the Black population is one of the major contributors of the wealth of this nation. Yes, we need reparations. They need to be paid now. They need to be paid not only for the for the 1921 massacre. They needed to be paid nationally, and there are serious intellectuals that have spoken about how this would look. No, it's not just cutting anyone a check. It's about a necessary redistribution of wealth in this country from those that accrue it. It's not only to pay back what has been stolen, that is part of it. It's also to redistribute the wealth of this nation so that we can have a more equitable foundation from which we can then begin. And that's what we have. Okay. See this from the state next door. I'm not put out a bill wanting to take federal money for any elementary middle school because it's a 1619 project. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And there he is. For arguing against naming, against making the District of Columbia another state, which is just hugely problematic. Taxation without representation, absolutely problematic. I do think, and of course, the reason why they don't want to do that is they don't want to put another two senators in there, especially if you get DC and Puerto Rico. I'm not speaking for the Puerto Ricans. I know there's a lot of independence movement there, but if we were to get DC and Puerto Rico as the 51st and the 52nd state in this union, that give us 4 more senators and can put us over the edge to finally get past the legacy of minority rule in this country. So, Senator Cotton yesterday presents this bill called Saving America History Act 2020. It's a farcical attempt to enshrine and ensure the racist history of this country remains intact, remains enshrined in the fairy tales that we call the national history. And this is his bill, all right? I just want to, the first two, it's a comical thing, all right? It's just a divide and conquer. And that's how the powerful win. They divide us and they conquer us. And this is all this is. He's just throwing this out, red meat to his base to talk about the radical left that are coming out. I just want to speak to the assertions that he makes. That's number 2 there. The self-evident truth set forth that the Declaration of Independence are the fundamental principles upon which America was founded. That's not true. Okay, the pro-slavery argument from 1830 to 1860. This is the studying that I was doing as I'm having my awakening here, as I'm learning about these things. You begin to see that the Declaration of Independence, there's no legal basis for that. That's not in law. What's in law is the Constitution, and the Constitution doesn't tell us that all men, quote unquote, are created equal. It doesn't say anything like that in the Constitution. It speaks about the right of property. So he comes here first, he makes a false declaration that this country are founded upon the Declaration of Independence, when that is not true. It should be true. We can make it true, but it's not ipso facto of American history. He's referred to the story exposing the fairy tales. Okay, there is no tenacity in terms of understanding the actual historical record in the mainstream account of how the United States was formed. We live in fairy tales. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all these guys, these are just the founding fathers. I hate that name. They're framers of the Constitution. They ain't my father. Okay, and we need to think a little bit more about that, the way we go about it. And then the last thing right here, I just would like to read the last 2 highlighted sentences there. 5 and 6. The 1619 project is racially divisive. Now, what does that mean? That means I read it, they don't know their place. Okay, that's the racial division. It's coming up and saying, wait a minute, we're going to reclaim our own history, and we're not going to let you determine what that history is. Racially divisive, revisionist account of history that threatens the integrity of the Union by denying the true principles on which it was founded. Now, that's a revealing thing. Integrity of the Union. Well, you say, well, what's the integrity of this union? You're saying that the integrity of this union then is going to be premised on the ability of minority rule, which we have with the Electoral College, what we have with the U.S. Senate, the institution of minority rule in this country to maintain a system of inequity, of inequality, and of property. And if you got it, you're okay, and most of us don't. Boom, the federal government has strong interest in promoting an accurate account of the nation's history through public schools and forming young people into knowledgeable and patriotic citizens. That's nothing but the miseducation of the young people in our country to maintain this racist state. We need to smash this. I have 2 kids, I have 3 kids. My youngest 2 are 16 and 18. They are the future. That you can see the generation come in and they went to Lee. They hated Lee. Lee Elementary School in 2012 and 2010, they were singing songs to Robert E. Lee. In my kids' own lifetime, they saw that. They say, no more. You see all of those monuments torn down. Yes, tear them down. They need to come down. And they say that, well, you're tearing them down. Isn't that extra legal? Isn't that against the law? Excuse me, I know this shouldn't be saying that. You say, no, it's not. Because for how many years have we been wanting these to go down? You gotta wait. Tearing them down right now. Beautiful. The Robert E. Lee monuments are the 2 on the right of your screen. That's Guar down there at the bottom. He's wonderful the way he went up there and said, F this guy. And then, of course, the one, my favorite, is just when it says horse. That's actually Andrew Jackson, but still, I love that one there. Bubba Wallace, right? I even got me a Bubba Wallace shirt, okay? For me, growing up in the South, for NASCAR to not fly the Rebel flag, that's huge. That's a huge cultural change, in my opinion, happening in this country, and it's beautiful, and it's long overdue. And then there's the tearing down of that disgraceful banner of racist hate. The one at the top, the woman, that's Breeze Newsom. That's actually in South Carolina. The other 3 images at the bottom are the final removal of the Confederate battle flag, the flag of the Northern Army of Virginia, right? That's, if you talk to these Confederate buffs, they'll tell you that, but it was removed from the Confederate battle, from the Mississippi state flag that had been there since 1895. And that's the movement that we have now. You'll notice I don't put any of that Confederate, I hate that Confederate flag. Okay, the only thing I want to see it is Breeze Newsom. That's the only time I ever want to see that flag again, is when it's held out like the filthy rag it is. And God bless that woman. She changed my life, that's for sure. Then we come down to the actual history here, okay? The year 1787, okay? Well, the year 1787, that was the Constitution. All right, here we move from, here 1776, the 4th of July, all this stuff. Again, fairy tales, hot dogs, all this other stuff, fireworks, drinking too much beer, et cetera, et cetera. But you start looking at it, well, 1776 until 1787, they had what was called the Articles of the Confederation. It was in 1787 that they finally put together we now know as the United States Constitution. That's the law, not the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. And in the Constitution of 1787, there was a compromise. You had the northern states. It was all a slave at that time. There were I shouldn't say that. New York wasn't a slave state. Vermont has in its charter not to be a slave state. Actually, it was a republic for the first 10 years. It wasn't a state until around this time. They didn't have slavery in. Massachusetts had banned slavery, but slavery was legal, or enslavement, I should say, was legal in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, and a lot of these other states. It was legal at the time as they were writing the Constitution. And then, of course, in the southern states, and South Carolina sticks out here as the most oppressive, if you will, the strongest of the slave states. What's important about which is in the Constitution, okay, that only came out of the Constitution Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln did in 1863, and then the first civil rights bill, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment after the end of the Civil War. Up until that time, they had the 3/5 law, where the 3/5 law said was that the slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person. Now, what did that do? That allowed, you remember, you're talking about the United States in the early part of our country. You had two chambers of Congress. You had the Senate and you had the House. The Senate, they weren't elected. Okay, they were voted in by the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives, that's where the popular vote was determined. So what the 3/5 compromise did, it allowed the slave states to count as their as 3/5 members of the lower chamber, the House of Representatives, according to that. What did that do? That gave the southern slave states far more representation than was deserved as per their free white male population. So already you had an undemocratic institution of power from the get-go. So all this BS that we're talking about, America, the home of the free and the land of the brave or whatever, it is not. Okay, we can make it that. All right, I am an American and I know we can do better. All right, so I'm not out here bashing the country. I'm saying let's move forward. But the 3/5 law allowed that to happen.
All right, Scott.
Remember, I'm coming to this on my time. Hello? You got me?
Yep, Scott, I think we're going to, I apologize, we're going to have to cut you off, but I want to take some questions or some comments, and I do want to share the slides with the participants. Your passion is really amazing, Scott. I just love what you're saying.
Well, I appreciate it. I couldn't see the time, so thank you. I will please share that. Absolutely, please share it.
Thank you, Scott, for your time and your energy and your passion to this. This is phenomenal. I can't wait to go through the rest of the slides. It has a lot of good information on there. What books do you recommend to learn more in closing here?
There's a book by it's a new book out. It's by William Darity and Kirsten Mullen. Okay, they're economists at Duke. It's called From Here to Equality. All right, and it's the most definitive case for reparations. All right, I absolutely recommend this book. William Darity, Sandy Darity is his name. He's long been talking about the issue of reparations. If you know the adage 40 acres and a mule, right? That was after the Civil War in Georgia. General Sherman said, who had come down, the Union general had said that the freed slaves, they need to have capital, they need to have land. And that's 40 acres and a mule. And what Sandy has done, Professor Darity has done, is he said, okay, you got 4 million freed slaves in 1865. Give them all the present value of a mule and 40 acres in 1865 and do the present discounted value of what that would be now. There's your reparations. So you begin to see that the capital, that the property was taken from them, and we see that they were then completely disenfranchised and not allowed to move forward, et cetera, et cetera. So certainly that. There's another one here, if I may, Nancy McLean, Democracy in Chains. This is another one, talks about how the radical right has been stealthily trying to take our economy and our country with us. And then the last one I'll reference here is the Neo-Confederate Reader. This is a fantastic book. I'll send these to Erica. Have them. This is also and the slave all the way back, all the way to what we're doing now. The person, James Loewen, this person's at the Southern Poverty Law Center. I absolutely recommend that book there.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Would you mind putting those titles in the group chat so that we can grab them up? Thank you so much, Dr. Carter, for your time. I appreciate you.